have tools and supplies that have been waiting patiently in our craft closets. Today on Beads, Baubles and Jewels, author and instructor Eva Sherman shows us some clever ways to emboss metal to add dimension and detail to any project. This is a beautiful piece, Eva. Welcome.
Thank you, Katie. I'm happy to be here.
Glad to have you. And you know, the beautiful texture is created with
an
supplies
embosser.
that lots of people already have.
Yes, if you ever did scrapbooking, then you probably have this tool in your collection. And the wonderful thing about it is that it works wonderfully on light gauge metals to create really nice dimensional textures.
So you don't have to be a metalsmith to get this technique?
No, and you don't have to use torches. So I know a lot of people can't or don't want to use torches, so this is a perfect way to do some intro metalsmithing.
Okay, great. Well, what should we do first?
Well, I'm going to show you how to emboss. So what I have done here is I have pre-cut some metal. Now, just so you know, we're going to do a cuff, and the cuff actually has a formula for sizing, and the formula is your wrist size minus 1/2 of an inch. So I have pre-cut this. It's 6 inches. So if you're 6.5 inches, this will fit you perfectly.
Okay.
So the first thing I'm going to do is put it into one of these folders, and these folders are actually designed for scrapbookers, so they're for paper. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set it in there, and there's usually a hole here in the center where I can poke it out a little bit, but if not, I'm not going to worry about it. What I see here is what is going to imprint. And so the embosser comes all set to the level that you need it. So it has these this platform and then these 2 acrylic panels, and so I'm going to just take it and put it between the 2 acrylic panels like this. And I'm going to roll it through, and we sometimes call this the poor man's rolling mill.
I like
because
it.
it does similar things, but I mean it's
Same idea.
yeah. And then you'll feel it give,
Bring
and
it back
I'll
again.
return it. And actually, let me run it through one more time because I didn't have the acrylic panel all the way up. So let me just do that one more quick time.
Okay. And what gauge metal are you using?
I'm using 30 gauge dead soft metal, and I've actually done this with 26 and even 24, but the heavier the metal is, the softer the imprint gets. So I like the 30 gauge because it gives you a nice crisp imprint. So now to make a cuff, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to, I have the base already cut. So this is a 1 1/4 inch wide, 30 gauge piece, 6 inches long, and the base is 20 gauge and it's 1 1/2 inch wide. 6 inches long also. So first thing I'm going to do is trim, file, and buff all the corners. So I'm just going to use a pair of shears and just trim, and then I'm going to file. So this is just for aesthetic purposes.
Sure.
And so that we're just going to round these corners, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the base.
Okay.
So in the
So you
interest,
have it all smooth all the way around,
yes.
both
So
pieces.
these pieces are already done so that you can see that the corners are nice and smooth.
Sure.
And for the top piece, it's more of an aesthetic thing, but for the base, you always want to round your corners so that you're not digging into your wrist.
Definitely want to keep it safe.
Yes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shape both of these pieces on a mandrel, and I've got a oval steel mandrel, which is a good tool to have when you're making cuffs, because cuffs, your wrists are oval, so you want to use something that is an oval. And the top piece actually is just going to be shaped like this. And if you notice some kinking where the embossing is raising the metal, you can take a rubber or plastic mallet and just kind of gently hammer it down. But this doesn't have to be the final shape. We just want to get it in the round because we can't assemble it flat. If we assemble it flat, when we bend it, we'll pop the rivets.
Okay.
So I'm just going to do that one there, and then I will do the base. And now this is the structural part of this. So this actually needs to be work hardened. And even though it's dead soft copper and I've work hardened it slightly by bending it, I'm going to do a little bit more work hardening just by hammering it with a rubber or a plastic mallet. And so what I do is just sort of methodically go over every square inch just so that I know that the whole thing is work hardened. If it doesn't get work hardened enough, it's squishy. So I'll show you here in a minute. And then since this is a graduated mandrel, typically I have to flip it over and do the same thing from the other side so that I get an even cuff. And so now it's not, you want to feel that?
Good.
It's, it's a
ready.
nice solid cuff base.
Okay.
So now I'm going to take the top piece that I have shaped here, and I'm going to put 4 pilot holes in the corner. So I'm going to do that with a 1.5 millimeter metal hole punch. And the reason the size is important is because I'm using 1.3 millimeter rivets.
So you want to make sure that they fit.
Yes. So in each corner, about 1/8 of an inch away from an outer edge, I'm going to put a hole. And so this one has already been prepped, and it's got the 4 holes. And so now I can begin my assembly process. And what I want to do is line it up so that it's centered this way and this way. So I just kind of work it a little bit, and you see that even though they're the same size, there's a little bit of a reveal because the bending radiuses are different. So you'll always have that little bit of a reveal unless you cut your top piece longer. So, and then sometimes what I do is I'll take a piece of painter's tape and just tape it into place, but other times when I'm feeling like I want to be a little bit quicker.
You're living on the edge.
Living on the edge, yes. I'm just going to hold it in place and use the pilot hole to punch through the base.
Okay.
And, oops. And so when I do that, I don't want to separate these anymore, because if I separate them, I don't know which corner goes with which hole. So I'm going to leave that together. I've got my rivets ready, and as I said earlier, this is a 1.3 millimeter rivet, so it works in there very well. And then to rivet them together, I'm going to go back on my mandrel, and I'm going to slide it down until I feel that the rivet head is sitting on steel, because what I want to do is mushroom the top of this rivet so that it connects those 2 pieces together. And before I do that, I'm actually going to trim that rivet down to 1/16 of an inch, which is about the thickness of a credit card. You don't need it really any higher than that. If you do leave it up too high, what tends to happen is when you go to rivet, you hit it sideways, like when you hit a nail the wrong way. So, and then I'm going to try to get another finger over here so that I don't put anybody's eye out. But that's about 1/16 of an inch, so it's just barely peeking over the top. And then I'm going to take my chasing hammer, and I usually start with the round end, and I'm just tapping it down at 90 degrees. And so this steel mandrel is resisting, and this steel chasing hammer is pushing it, so that's going to forge the end of that rivet out to kind of a mushroom shape. And then once I get it down where I know it's connected, I flip it over, and I just, if you have a dome chasing hammer, then you can really get things nice and flat. And so what you're trying to accomplish here is that you don't have anything that's sticking up that will catch or scratch, and that rivet head is down as flush as it can.
So you do that on all 4 corners?
Yes, and what you would want to do is, I did this corner first, I would want to go caddy corner to the opposite side. So the next rivet I would do would be like the X across.
Okay.
And then once the 2 are done, then it's kind of safe, it won't move, it won't distort, and I can even set it down if I want to. So this one has already been riveted, so really you can see that everything's nice and flush, and the last thing I will need to do is put it into the liver of sulfur, give it a little patina, and then we'll finish it.
Go ahead and...
Okay, so this, you guys can't tell, but this is stinky. This is liver of sulfur, and this gives a patina on copper. Now, I typically do my liver of sulfur in copper in cold water. With silver, you need hot water, but with copper, cold water works fine. So I don't want to get on my fingers, and the longer it stays in, the darker it gets. So there I've got kind of a reddish, goldish, and if I put it back in, it's going to go coffee brown, and then ultimately it will go to that deep midnight blue-black.
Looks really good. Yeah, so you can get a lot of different looks there.
Yeah, so now I can, once I've rinsed it, I can touch it. I don't want to get that stuff on my fingers.
Right.
And let me get a paper towel and we'll dry this off. And now we're going to use a little buffer block to highlight the high spots and really show off that texture that we've created. And sometimes you want to give it a minute or 2 to dry and get all that water out, because it kind of seeps in between there. And if you don't get it dry, then it tends to smudge a little bit. So
All right, switch back.
Let's switch back, yes.
Excuse me.
So just one of these little buffing blocks, and as you can see, it takes off the patina on the high areas. And you can do this as heavy as you want. You know, sometimes I like to leave it a little darker. Sometimes I really go in there, and then the dark just stays in the outlined areas. So kind of whatever your design aesthetic is.
Yeah, that looks great.
But it really accents.
Now, it looks like you also added another little embellishment here.
Yes.
I must have rushed you right past that.
Yes, and we can go back and do that on here. That's just a little eyelet that is just a little design detail, and sometimes you can look at some of these. Sometimes I'll even drop a little Swarovski chaton in there just to add a little piece of bling. So why don't we do that on this one since
Okay.
So what I use is a power punch. And I've got this set so that it's exactly, this comes with a bunch of different size punches. So I've got it set so that it's the same size as the eyelet that I have, so I don't have to think about it. So I'm just going to kind of look, and where do I want I like to find a center of a flower, or, you know, someplace where it would make sense to have a little piece of bling or an eyelet. And so I've punched that hole, and then I've got these little eyelets here, and they just drop right in like that, and then I'm going to turn it over on the steel block, and I usually start opening it up with the dapping tools. I'll use a smaller one just to get that flared out a little bit, and then move to a little bit bigger one.
That's a good idea. And also people who have scrapbooking stuff could use an eyelet setting tool too.
Yes. And I like to open this up gradually, because if you try to flare it all at once, you'll end up splitting the sides.
That is what happens a lot of times with those.
And then when it's flared about like that, then I can take the domed end of the chasing hammer and just flatten that down. And
All right. And so then when this piece is attached to your bracelet blank, then you're just going to glue your crystal in.
Yes,
Right?
so this lays right down on the base, so there's a little well right there.
Perfect.
And so I just drop a little bit of glue in there and set that little crystal right in there.
Well, that looks so pretty. Good idea. Let's take a look at the bracelets that you have where we can see the stones that are attached. And there's also an example at the front there of the flower one that you showed us with an eyelet with no stone inside.
Yes. So there's different things you can do with these embossing, and this is a silver one, and silver and copper have very similar properties, so if you didn't want to work with copper, you could do this with silver also.
Well, it's so pretty. Well, let's talk a little bit about the pendant demo that you brought with you too.
Okay, let's switch this out.
Sure. I'll take this for you.
Okay. I like to do cuffs. I'll wait till you come back. But there are other things that you can do with this also. So, for instance, you can make pendants, you can make earrings, and basically it's the same process. So what you do is you cut out your piece that you're going to texture, you cut out your base piece, and if you want to do a little bit of designing on the side, I sometimes like to chew out these little just to give
Using
it
the hole punch?
Yeah, just to give it a
Yeah.
little texture. So basically, you cut out your pieces, you run your top piece through the embosser, you trim, file, and buff your corners. If you wanted to do a three-dimensional one, you could add a layer first you always have to work from the top down.
Yes.
So if you wanted to add, like for instance, this has another layer on top, you would put those on first and rivet those, and then once those are riveted, then you could rivet, whoops, this is the next one, then you could rivet here. Now what I have done here is I've actually put a spacer in between. I just wanted to demonstrate that if you put little crimp
Can you
beads
show
in,
us how do you rivet that with the
Sure.
spacer in there?
Sure. Yeah, now this one's all set, so I'm just going to pull it off. Oh, what I do is I'll put some painter's tape on the back
Oh,
just
good
to
idea.
make
Hold
sure
it in
that those
place.
rivets don't fall. So once I've got everything lined up, put some painter's tape, and then we can set this on the steel block. And we'll do the same thing where we're going to trim it to 1/16 of an inch.
Okay.
start with the domed end here and so that will rivet also. That needs it needs a little bit more work here. The one thing that you don't want to do when you're using spacers is you don't want to go bigger than 1.5 to 2 inches maximum, because otherwise what tends to happen is they slide apart like this.
Oh yeah, and I could see how that might create a bend too in your thinner metal.
So let me go ahead and do the caddy corner opposite one.
Okay.
So yeah, once those are down, nothing's going to happen. And then what I like about these spacers is you can use them, you can put your chain in there,
right,
you can put a piece of leather.
Itself, huh?
Yes, yes,
that
exactly. So the last thing that I do on a finished cuff is I always seal copper for a couple of reasons. One, it protects the skin of the wearer. Sometimes people react to copper on their skin. And two, it keeps the finish the way that I've created it. So
you're using...
I go to the hardware store and I get some sort of a acrylic gloss spray. There's matte, satin, gloss. I kind of like the gloss finish, so most of these have a gloss finish on them. But if you leave this, you know, copper eventually, all copper ends up looking like an old penny. So
right.
if you don't seal it, I mean, some people like that.
Keeps it nice and shiny.
Yes.
You want a little bit of shine with a little bit of rough too.
I
right?
like shiny things, yes.
Me too. All right, well, thanks so much, Eva. These are beautiful projects and so quick to whip up. We could make these tonight.